Hi everyone. So here we are, last lecture for spring 2020 for visual narratives, and I'm here again in the lounge part of my studio building where there is nobody but me. Uh, that has been the case for weeks now. So I get to sit here in front of this non-working fireplace and talk to you for a little while, uh, just to kind of reflect on this class, what we've done, your last discussion response, a couple of things I want to go over. Do that last thing first. So, with regard to your responses to the Animatrix as it pertained to the Matrix franchise, really enjoyed your responses. Some of you, the majority of you, were familiar with the Matrix franchise in and of itself, which I wasn't surprised at. And some of you were familiar with the Animatrix too, but not as many people as I thought would be. But what I really enjoyed was the way that you engaged with it, and also a lot of people kind of looked at it as maybe better than the trilogy itself, which that's an arguably good point, seeing as how the trilogy kind of went downhill in terms of losing the threads to its own storyline or convoluting them to the point of not being able to be easily discerned. And I think what makes sense with a lot of your critical points about that, a lot of people chose the Second Renaissance parts 1 and 2 as the some of the animation to focus on, one of the animated pieces to focus on, maybe because it is so expositional in terms of a prelude or a prologue or you know a lead up to the Animatrix. I mean the Matrix franchise itself, kind of putting that into a place where it makes more sense. And I think I may have mentioned to you that the Wachowskis had written something that was, I can't remember exactly what the title was. It was called like Bits and Pieces or Flotsam and Jetsam or something. That was sort of a non sequitur title to it that was cobbled together and used as the platform to create the Second Renaissance clips. And it works. It becomes a bit of world building that, in some ways, the trilogy was sort of starving for, and helps put a better perspective on it. And then from that being there, then the other animated pieces in the Animatrix become that much more palpable in terms of their recognizability within that world. We can call it, to take a word from how I would describe Tolkien's world, a legendarium. I don't think the Matrix necessarily rises to the level of legendarium, but it is a world. It is a place that has enough of a story that we can kind of believe in. It's the rule sets and the characters and the design of the whole thing as a place where a lot of different stories can take place. The Star Wars universe is also one of them too. Marvel universe, of course. Marvel universe. There's so many actual comics that were written, stories that are attached to it. That's something that's all the stories that you might want to tell are extant. Whereas the Star Wars universe is Star Wars universe singular. Sorry. Which I didn't delve into, and I guess that's something that, if I were to do this again, I might have included that. But those were screenplays exclusively, and any of the novels and other stories you see out there are spin-offs of that, trying to stay within the canon, of course, but also trying to expand the universe. And I think this Animatrix piece shows the level of the expansiveness that the Matrix universe can have, the Matrix Legendarium can have. I'll just say universe. Let's just go with that. But I like the fact that a lot of people chose the most expositional pieces to analyze and to actually have them make more sense of the Matrix trilogy itself. I mean, it makes sense But at the same time, it's not necessarily like the prettiest piece. It's actually kind of ugly in spots, purposely so. It's violent and horrifying at times to sort of mimic those horrors of war and reportage that you see in there. Um, and then but there are other pieces that are certainly much more artful, like Beyond and Program and Matriculated too, which is like definitely the most trippy of them. I love that one myself because it is very surreal and it comes with all kinds of different levels of philosophical questions that are attached to it. But in an overview of all of your responses, I would say that I'm again very pleased with your level of criticality and engagement and just considerately smart thinking about these pieces, which are kind of, they're pure entertainment. They're part of the entertainment complex, but they are built by artists. So you, as artists yourselves, going in and looking at it through the lens of such as a consumer of the entertainment, but also as a creator, or as Tolkien like to say, a sub-creator. uh, you can start to unpack it and not just see the mindset of the creators, but also see how some of that process stuff reveals itself and how it can apply to some of the things that you do with regard to certainly narrative and how to marry the visuals with such, and how to create those things successfully, or how to avoid not making them successful, how to avoid the mistakes that you may have seen being made in certain things. And I do hope that's what this class has given you. And speaking of, obviously, very obviously, this is not where I expected any of us to end up with regard to this class, with the school, with our lives. I'm sorry for it, just because we're all dealing with this in very different ways, and there's different levels of hardship that we've all encountered with that. I, for myself, for being a professor whose responsibility is to teach you something and to give you information with which I'm familiar that you can use in what it is that you do, not just for the sake of a grade, but for the sake of your practice, for the sake of your art, for the sake of your future pedagogy. If you're becoming a teacher, it was up to me to adapt and change and try and get that across to you. And in doing so, this obviously we've got some time on our hands, so it's given me some time to not only do this and try and think about different ways to engage with you on a not particularly personal platform, but also what my curriculum means in the overall, as far as how to get people engaged and what does engagement actually mean, what does scholarship mean, what does academics mean in the face of art, and in an art school. I mean, the university as a whole is not an art school, but LA&D, where I'm kind of ensconced, is. And for people who are makers and creators, what's the importance of academics in their creative life? And sometimes there's a tendency to silo those things apart from one another. One thing is something that I have to deal with, and the other thing is the thing that I want to do. And once I get this out of the way, like, this will take prominence. But the academic side of things, and this is not for my own benefit to say, it's important in the sense of that it's always going to feed the creative side. Those things do need to become symbiotic if you're going to get anywhere with your own work, because otherwise it's just kind of being done in a vacuum. It's only being done for the sake of its own formal processes. We've discussed the formal versus interpretive. So just for the sake of its own kind of object presence in the world and its potential saleability or whatever. But that's got nothing to do with you, like personally. So the personal side of yourself that moves into your art comes through the side that can intellectualize and create and ideate things that you know into an art form. So scholarship and academia is the thing that hones that as a skill in the same way that a studio class would hone your hand skills. And of course I say that, and like in a perfect world, in a perfect art school, in a perfect art education, those things you shouldn't be able to, even a student shouldn't be able to even discover the difference between those. You shouldn't be able to silo one out versus the other one. But we do. And why is that? And I think sometimes it's the nature of the approach of not just the instructor, but maybe an entire department, maybe an entire school and its philosophy. As a teacher, as a professor, and I've been doing this for, I can say, like on an official level or a technical level, I've been doing it since the millennium, so that's 20 years. From an undergrad level, a little over a decade. And only recently I really focused on the lecture portion of academics versus the studio portion. I was a studio teacher for over a decade. And now here I am doing like a lecture circuit kind of thing with my courses, which I'm certainly happy to do. It's kind of a neat change for me. And it gives me an opportunity to sort of apply my trade as a professor in a totally different way that's challenging because of its difference from studio, but also because I can come at it from a space where I've been doing studio teaching all along, so I know what that means to you. And I also know what academics mean to the studio undergrad artist who's focused on a particular craft, whether it's illustration or fine art or sculpture or photography or ceramics or metalsmithing or woodworking or whatever, filmmaking, animating, comics. It's all making. It's not reading and writing and responding and trying to maintain a critical eye and using critical language to talk about work. But you do end up talking about your work even in those studio classes. So you do have critiques. You do put work up there and you're expected to not talk about just your own, which is hard enough, but then also be able to offer up your own insights in the critique of others' works. And I know sometimes those don't go well. Nobody talks, or everyone says something nice, and no one's actually being critical. So how do you get around that? Or how do you fix that part of things? And that's with the academic side. Because if you're all doing that, then a lot of you are doing the other thing too. And if we all know that we're in all that stuff together, then you can bring the stuff out of the academic classes that you're rigorously deconstructing Star Wars: The Phantom Menace and telling us how horrible it is. And there's arguments going back and forth where it's just like, well, I have a nostalgia thing about it, but from this level, like the setup and dialogue and exposition is all wrong and blah blah blah, and that becomes a critique of that piece in and of itself. But then you get into the studio and everyone's just like they've got like a mouthful of molasses, like no one's saying anything. Or if people are saying things, they're very, very careful with their words because we don't want to upset anybody. But it's actually more upsetting, I think, to the person's work when you're not saying anything, or you're only just patting them on the back. And that's not a useful tool. It's not useful to anybody. So I want me as now like the more academic professor, I want to be able to take what I'm giving you and have you directly mainline that stuff right into the studio practice. So what is it about visual narratives that can do that? Well, I mean, we've talked about the relationships between things like world building and narrative. You know, me being the huge Tolkien geek and fan and scholar to a degree, as a foundational basis of how to world build, but then also coming down to much more simple forms, like where I did that lecture, I was kind of deconstructing just a Charlie Brown strip and just showing how like the simplest moments of editing can radically change meaning. So those are both very functional tools that you can bring with you to your own creations. Because there is no, for human beings, there is no ex nihilo. There is no out of something nothing. There's something there, right? You know, everything is a remix proposition. You know, there's raw materials and craft and honed materials there, sort of for you to work with, for you to reference, for you to maybe appropriate to a certain degree, for you to rethink a new paradigm that sort of parallels something that you've seen before, but you're mixing it with something else and putting your own personal spin on it. And that's all done through a lens of narrativity. You know, even the work that I do to bring myself into. One of the reasons I was asked to make this course is because the people who did so recognized my my penchant for narrativity, not necessarily in the work that I do now, but in the things that I like to look at and talk about. But even in my work actually reflects a desire to create narrativity that you think is there and is not there, and you have to sort of grapple with that idea when looking at my work. And I construct my work to do that very thing. So I know it's like one of the ridiculous, well, no, not ridiculous, the philosophy, let's just say, the philosophy of like the presence of absence. You know, it's something that's not there, and it makes it more palpable that it's not there, that its there-ness comes from its not being there. And that's kind of like, what? But I think there is kind of something to that, because you know, there's oversaturation of, you know, narrative constructs, and then there is the implication of narrative constructs that sort of clues us in to its kind of omnipresence in all the things that we take in with regard to, you know, entertainment. I mean, look at the whole gaming industry. I mean, the basis of an immersive game world has to have an incredibly structured narrative, so you can break it down into sections so that people can play through a game. It can't be some kind of, you know, abstract idea that you don't even know where you are or what you're doing, because that would definitely lose a lot of people in terms of engaging in gameplay. But it's the same thing when you go to the theater. You know, you can't take, you know, a bunch of superheroes and throw them into a radically abstract, like Bertolt Brechtian poem and expect people to know what the hell you're doing. You know, which is a really cool idea. There's a free one, so run with that. Bertolt Brecht and superheroes, go for it. I don't know what you're going to do with that, but I wanted to, since this course was brand new at the beginning of the semester, I had not put it into a real-time scenario yet. So every time I walked into the classroom and had a lecture prepared for you, I was looking at it like, you know, how is this going to play? There's no way for me to know. I could have sat there and recorded myself talking to myself, and then sat there and tried to objectively, you know, view it through the lens of a student and pretend I was hearing it for the first time. But that's kind of virtually impossible. So of course, you know, the first run of this course is kind of a playing field, a testing ground for whether or not the curriculum is you know, super solid. And I felt pretty good about it. I did tell you that a lot of it was going to change over the semester, and I was tweaking and changing things as I went. I even do that with the classes that I have that are already kind of like solidly in place, where I'll change it here and there just a little bit, kind of like a a professional comedian kind of reads the room. They say a couple of jokes, and then they're just like, yeah, I'm not gonna go do like the hyper intellectual joke because I don't think this is the crowd for that. Or we say, yeah, like they seem like a pretty hip crowd. Maybe I can try something a little more, difficult to follow, and then the outcome will be that much stronger. They weigh those things. Like that's, comedy is actually a great place to sort of watch an artful craft sort of trying to look like it's effortless, whereas it's actually, there's a lot of study and practice that goes into it. So it's the same thing with teaching. So I'm always going to be changing up things along the way. So when a curriculum is brand new, there's a lot of changes that are going to take place. So when mid-semester, all of a sudden, the coronavirus scare happens, and we all have to stay home, and I have to change something as radically as an asynchronous learning platform where we're doing it this way in this very impersonal fashion. There's no way for me to know what that curriculum was going to do or was supposed to do. It was just an idea. You were going to be the ones who solidified the idea at the end of the day with my looking at your response to it. So the beginning of the semester I thought went really well. It kind of went along the path that I had planned. It kind of meandered a little bit here and there, but never off that central track. But then this whole thing happened, and I was just like, I was like lost in the woods for a minute. I'm like, well, what am I supposed to do now? I didn't even know exactly where this was going, and now I'm given a completely different way of tracking through the woods. So I had to change how you were going to engage with it. So I wanted to make it more entertaining, for lack of a better way of putting it. I wanted to make it more engaging in terms of like something that you may have seen before, or something that I knew was going to be fun. And I don't. That's academically speaking. That sometimes it seems like a bad word, but I did want it to be fun, and at the same time, I wanted to present it to you and give you the tools and ideas for you to deal with it in a more academic way, and still have it be fun. And so what I learned from that is that engagement in something in a way that doesn't seem like it's academic, but it actually is actually a good way to go. And I know that sounds sort of like, well, when you put it that way, isn't that kind of obvious? It's like, well, no, because sometimes you want that scholarly paper to be written. You want that scholarly reading to be read, because when I read it, I'm just like, oh wow, that says so much, and it's so smart, and it's so part of everything that we're doing. But there's some constituency of students that will look at it and they'll just be like, this is so dry and boring, and I get it, but I don't like it. And I can't say that academia is forcing people to like things in order for them to understand it better. If you try and feed a baby, mashed up Brussels sprouts, and they spit it out all over you, do you just keep feeding them until you're covered with, Brussels sprout goo? That doesn't make a lot of sense. So, I had this opportunity to do this. I felt like this change was an opportunity to mix it up, make it more fun, make it even more about the things that I enjoy, because I know them, because I've spent so much time with them over the years, and have found, through rewatching and rereading a lot of these things, have found a whole different perspective on it that I'd like for you to be able to see. So it was so heartening to see your reaction to a film as old as Jaws, and with special effects that sometimes are just so laughably goofy that it almost takes away all of like the seriousness and the wonder that Spielberg can generate in the film. And then you have this sort of super plastic looking shark, jumping up on the boat and just chomping away at Quint there. It's like, when I was 6 years old and saw that, it was frightening as hell. But even a 6-year-old now would look at that and just be like, that looks like a bathtub toy. Like, what the hell's going on there? Nevertheless, you all talked about that film in the discussion forum really, really intelligently and engaged with it in such a sincere way that it almost brought tears to my eyes, because I was just like, oh my God, here's like a whole other generation of people that if this were presented in the wrong way, it would be lost on you. And I tried to present it in a way just to be like, look at it from the perspective of an academic and an art student, an intelligent individual, and look at it for the beauty of what it was and when it was made. And here's a bunch of separate things to look at so you can watch and wait for them. And you all just like picked that stuff out, and it seemed like you were, I could be wrong, but maybe you guys are such adept writers that you fooled me into thinking that you were really into it. And I think you were really into it. And so I really appreciate that. So almost like, as a reward, not really, but just to kind of continue that thread, I was like, well, how about something that, now I'm doing all these things that I like, how about something that they'll like kind of on equal footing with me? Because I love all of Pixar stuff. I have a friend who works for Pixar, as I've mentioned, and I've watched my kids grow up with those movies and how it's kind of moved them and how it's moved me. As an artist and also a consumer of these things, and a guy with kids, a father who kind of watches the wonder of a child watching these things, which is awesome. And I wanted you to sort of have that ability to look at some of the same things that are fairly contemporary. So all of those Pixar shorts, some of them are not contemporary, some of them are quite old. But I wanted to run it up against the more contemporary ones and see what you have to say about that. And you also had a lot of fun with that too. And some of those you hadn't seen before, and some of them you had, and some of them you wrote about it in a way where you were rediscovering it, you were seeing it like for the second or third time, but new for the first time because you're seeing other things. And that to me is like the beauty part of this whole exercise, in that you're able to come at it with a brand new lens and in a way that I can tell that it's been fun for you to do so. So all that in mind, thank you for letting me ramble, but I wanted to leave you with something substantial and something heartfelt from me, because we've all, I know, had, as I said before, we've all had kind of a time with doing all this. And it was hard to know exactly what to do and what it was going to be worth as far as everybody's time and efforts were concerned. So I wanted to reflect on that here on this video so that you could hear my thoughts on it. But I also want you to do me one last little favor and reflect on it yourself. So I have one last discussion forum for you to participate in. And that forum will basically be your reflection on the semester. Now, let me just say that I don't necessarily want this to be a rant about, how shitty things have theoretically become because of all this. I think we all know that we've all been hamstrung, whether it's like, the school or me professionally, or you in terms of your engagement with the school and with the curriculum. Yeah, we all got blindsided by this whole thing. So that's not something that's necessarily worth talking about. Not because it's not relevant, it's super relevant. But I think we're all kind of on a similar page with that. We all have had a hard time with it. So it's not really for that. It's more along the lines of, what did you get out of this? What can you take with you? I'd really like to know, because it helps me. What can you take with this that's sort of portable for you to take out of the classroom, apply it to other things that you do? Whether a lot of you are in the art program, so how does it apply to your process? How does it apply to your creating in terms of like animation or comics and or stuff like that? Or if you're part of the program where you're going for art therapy or teaching, how would it apply to that? How would it apply to your writing? How would it apply to um, you know, theoretically, like having students in the future and getting them to engage with uh, with stuff that is contemporary and seems like entertainment, but asking them to look at it in a different way where they can actually learn something instead of being passively entertained for its own sake. Uh, just it can be personal. You can address me personally. You can say stuff about me. You can. I would hope that it's complimentary, but if you want to be critical, please. I'm a grown man. I can take it. In fact, I learned so much from you guys in your writing, in your perspective, in your social engagement with the world. Um, that's the other beauty part about being a professor, is that it keeps me really in touch and on the ground with what younger generations are going through and looking at and talking about, because it's so easy for, as you get older, to become removed from that because you become so sort of stuck in your own world. You've kind of grown and you don't need to deal with certain things anymore, so you let all those things go, and you don't necessarily pay attention to other things that are developing in the world. Not because you don't like them or because you're old man yelling at cloud, uh, you know that level of that kind of criticism. It's more like sometimes you just don't have time to pay attention. Well, fortunately, I'm in a position. My job is to pay attention to you and therefore pay attention to those things, because it allows me to speak to you about it on a level that's not so removed where it sounds like I'm coming from like a different era, a different epoch of pedagogy, and I always want it to be contemporary. So your feedback really helps with that. Unfortunately, I don't have the feedback that I would always prefer, and that would be in the classroom and hearing you speak and say things, and being critically engaged and using your critical thinking and talking about things, and even correcting other people, you know, as far as the way that they're approaching things, socially or artistically or whatever. It's all good because it's all a learning process, and I'm not above that, so nor should you be. If that's the case, because it's hard for old people to learn. You're all your parents are probably almost the same age as me, if not exactly the same age as me. So you know how hard it is for them to take in new things. So, you know, uh, but I'm in a position where I'm really lucky with that. So please be as colloquial as you want. You can cherry pick through anything that's happened in the semester as far as the lectures, whether it's all the stuff that I've done online or it's things that I did when we were all back in the classroom together, things that have really stuck with you, new insights, and what you may be able to do with it after this class is over and we're back in the summer and hopefully back on campus, please, in the fall. I mean, I don't know. I certainly hope to see you then. And I hope in the time between now and then, and I see you next, that you'll all stay very safe and happy and keep creating. Try and stay engaged with your favorite things that are creative and productive. Not in the sense that you have to be productive to recognize your own worth in this time where we should all be spending our time wisely, and we're kind of setting a bar for ourselves that may be unrealistic because this is difficult to wrap our heads around individually and collectively. So don't put any extra added pressure on yourself. If you're going to make something, if you're going to create, do it because you want to and because it's going to make you happy, and I think it will. I'm going to keep doing it. Please, this is kind of a silly plug, but please, follow me on Instagram. A number of you already have. So it's just, I think the handle is just Rob Sullivan Art. Because that'll allow me to see what you're doing as well, as far as your creation is concerned, as far as your art is concerned, as far as your just being is concerned. I'm very interested in all of you. Otherwise, I wouldn't take the time to talk to you in this way and to deliver the things that I love to you in the way that I do, because I feel it's important to pass these things on, because it's enriched my life as an artist and as a teacher, and I feel that it can with yours too, whether it's contemporary or whether it's old. It's all about its relevance, and its relevance to what it is that we do and what we can bring to what it is we do. So please enjoy the extensive time off that we're going to have, but be as productive as you can and take breaks whenever you want. Nobody's putting any time pressure on you with that. Speaking of, if you are missing any assignments for me, any discussion stuff, some people have been very good about if the discussion board closes and they haven't gotten to it in time, are still emailing me discussion responses, which is great. I'm not condoning lateness and saying that it's great that you were late. It's actually great that you still stuck with it and gave me the responses that I was asking for, because I'm very interested in reading all of it. I do read all of it. I can't have time. It's impossible to respond to everybody on an individual basis. But believe me when I say that I read all of it and I appreciate all of it a lot. Because, I know you're doing it, for the class, but in a way you're also doing it for me. So if you're missing anything, please take the next, week and a half, I guess what it is before the grading period starts, to kick in, to get me whatever it is that you may be missing, because I do want to read it. And some of you have actually said that you wanted to make up for it because you enjoyed the topic, and when you did actually get down to doing it, you really enjoyed doing it. And like I said, the quality of the writing and your attitudes towards it was very clear in your voices and in the discussions that you did enjoy it. So I want you to continue to do so with all that it is that you do. Please feel free to email me if you have any questions about anything, and I sincerely hope that you're happy and well, and I also sincerely hope that I'll see you real soon. Take care. Bye for now.